About the story, The Telltale Heart. It's a short story by Edgar Allan Poe. Background of the story: Edgar Allan Poe, from 1809 to 1849, was born in Boston to parents who were traveling actors. Orphaned by the time he was 3, he moved to Virginia where friends of his family raised him. As a young man, Poe worked as a journalist while writing the stories and poems that would earn him the title "Father of the Modern Mystery." After his wife died, Poe fell into despair. He passed away 2 years later. His dark and sometimes horrifying works perhaps mirrored the darkness and sadness of his own short life. Setting a purpose. As you read, pay attention to the way the narrator describes himself. What makes him unusual? So, as we have to pay attention to the narrator and focus why he is unusual or what makes him unusual. Let's begin the story.
True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever.
Here we have notice and note signpost, which is about contrast and contradictions. In paragraph 1 to 2, highlight details that contradict each other or that contrast with your normal expectations. So we need to go to paragraph 1. So in the first paragraph, we have the sentence, I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Here the person is saying, I heard many things in hell. So he is hearing the things in hell, which is not normal. Contrast with our normal expectations. And then he even justify himself like, how then am I mad? But we can see that he is not a normal person, right? In the second paragraph, I love the old man. We have a video here to watch. Close read. Let's watch the video now.
True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad?
It seems the narrator is jumping in and responding to something that has been said to him prior to this first sentence.
Right, because he says true as if this is happening in the middle of a conversation and someone's just accused him of being mad, which, given the context, I think means crazy, right?
Yeah, and he's admitting to being dreadfully nervous, but he's also questioning why anyone would call him crazy.
And it's interesting to me, too, that Poe is using all this punctuation, so these exclamation points, italics, dashes. I kind of feel like that's indicating the narrator's emotional state. He sounds totally nervous or excited.
So the disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them.
And there are the dashes again, right?
Right. The dashes make me think the narrator is rushing, like his speech can't keep up with his thoughts.
But it could also be the opposite, right? I mean, the narrator is choosing his words very slowly and carefully. It's really an interesting use of punctuation. And what's this about a disease, right?
Yeah, I wonder what he's talking about there.
Maybe it's connected to why someone would say he's insane or unstable. Though he's not saying the disease has destroyed him, instead it's heightened him in some way.
That's true.
And then Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad?
So he uses the fact that he has heard all things in heaven and hell to claim that he is sane, but hearing things in heaven and hell is not exactly normal.
Right, anything but normal. I mean, I have to say that if this is a narrator who's trying to convince us that he's stable, this train of thought is not helping his case. I mean, the guy's nuts, right?
Right. So let's read on. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story.
So there's another dash and exclamation mark. He's saying how healthily, how calmly, and emphasizing not destroyed, not dulled. But he's totally proving the opposite. I mean, he sounds anything but calm.
He kind of sounds defensive. All this makes me wonder if we can really trust him as a narrator.
Right, me too. My guard is up. We should look for evidence of that as we hear the whole story unfold.
I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ah, would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night just at 12 I looked in upon him while he slept.
Signpost to discuss here again and again. Notice and note in paragraph 4 highlight details or ideas that the narrator keeps repeating as he tells his story. So let's go to paragraph 4. Here it is. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed. So here we have the repetition. We can see the repetition. So that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrusted it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly. So just notice the repetition and underline it, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Huh, what would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, cautiously. So he's repeating the words here. So underline the words and the phrases which shows us the repetition. Now let's infer. Why do you think the narrator repeats these ideas again and again? So the repetition may show that the narrator is not in his right mind, or that it is extremely important to him that the reader understand exactly what he has done. So this is the reason of the repetition. Paragraph 5.
Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close-fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily.
Analyze plot of view. Annotate. In paragraph 5, highlight details that suggest whether the narrator can or cannot be trusted to describe events as they truly are. So let's do it. Here, upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. So he was more cautious. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. So he was that slow. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my. Here, the word sagacity means sound judgment, and I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To underline this, to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he could even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at at the idea. So underline this, then we may infer. Now let's infer. Is the narrator reliable or unreliable? Explain why you think so. So we underline that I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. So, and I fairly chuckled at the idea. So the narrator seems to have an overly positive view of his own abilities. So here we may doubt on his mental state, right? The 6th paragraph.
I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot.
Here we have text in focus. Let's watch this to be more specific and clear about the text. This will help us understand the story in a better way.
One of the challenges in reading The Telltale Heart is just how strange and spooky it is. But if you carefully visualize the story, you'll have an easier time understanding it. Remember, visualizing is the process of turning the text into pictures in your mind. To create those pictures, combine descriptions in the text with your prior knowledge or what you already know about the world. For example, the narrator describes how he crept into the old man's room. He says, "Then I thrust in my head. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed." Poe provides lots of details to help you picture this scene. Now add your prior knowledge. Think about a time when you were sneaking around, like maybe at home at night, trying really hard not to wake anyone up. Can you remember how it felt and how you probably looked? Use that information to help you visualize this scene and to help you understand how slowly the man is moving. Later, the narrator describes how he opened a very, very little crevice in the lantern, or opened it just a bit, and a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. Use Poe's vivid descriptions to visualize this scene in your mind. Your prior knowledge. Maybe you've seen light coming through a crack in a door at night, or seen the narrow beam of a small flashlight in the dark. That prior knowledge can help you really picture this scene. But what if your prior knowledge isn't helping that much? For example, Poe talks about the old man's vulture eye, but maybe you've never seen a vulture or its eyes. In cases like that, you need to rely on details in the text to help you visualize. Poe describes it as a pale blue eye with a film over it. So when you read, remember to use your prior knowledge to visualize. But if it doesn't help, don't worry. Carefully look at the descriptions and details in the text. Those descriptions will help you see how Poe resolves this dark story and what his crazed narrator does next.
So we got the idea to how to connect and understand the story in a better way. Paragraph 11.
And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, Amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. Stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more.
So here we have something: suspense, analyze, suspense, annotate, highlight words and phrases, and paragraph 11 and 12 that Poe uses to create suspense. So in paragraph 11, he used the phrase beating of the drum. And in paragraph 12, I scarcely breathed, and again here he used hellish tattoo of the heart. Hellish tattoo means awful drumming. So these are the phrases he used to create suspense. Now let's analyze. Why does these details create suspense? So these phrases make the situation seem especially frightening or tense. A person who scarcely breathes, for instance, is probably very nervous, right? So these words and phrases heighten the suspense by showing that the narrator might actually go ahead and kill the old man. Paragraph
Will
13.
you think me mad? You will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all, ha.
Let's analyze the point of view here. In paragraph 13 and 14, highlight details that show how the narrator tries to convince readers that he is sane and reliable. So in paragraph 13, he mentions, if still you think me mad, you will think so no longer. In paragraph 14, I had been too wary for that. Now let's evaluate the details. What effect do the narrator's explanations have on the reader? Do we think is he insane, irreliable, or not? So we may not be convinced of the narrator's sanity because of his previous unreliability, and because murdering someone, especially for such a reason, is not the act of a sane person. Do you agree? Yes, exactly.
When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search. Search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears.
A contrast and contradictions. Notice a note highlight details that shows the contrast between narrator's perception of the noise and the police officers. Then draw conclusions. What conclusion can you draw about this noise? Sentences such as I gasped for breath, and yet the officer heard it, indicate that the narrator is hearing what sounds like a heartbeat, but the police do not hear anything out of the ordinary because we know that the narrator is unreliable and acts peculiarly. It seems likely that the noise is only in his head.
No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? No, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here. Here it is the beating of his hideous heart.
So this is the end of the story. The narrator thinks or believes the police are smiling hypocritically. He thinks they are pretending to be kind but are actually planning to arrest him. So this was going in his head. And have you wondered why can't the police officers hear the old man's heart? So they can't hear the heart because it isn't beating anymore. Let's read the summary of the story. A Telltale Heart tells the story about a man who commits a murder to an old man just because, according to the man's point of view, the old man has blue eyes that resembles of a vulture. The man dismembers the old man's body part and hide them under the wooden plank in the old man's chamber. When the policemen come, come to investigate, he can hear the old man's heart beating. Frightened, he finally confessed that he have committed a murder. So here, this is the end of the story. Thank you so much.